all the organizers for organizing this event and for inviting me. It has been an honor and a pleasure to be here and to hear everyone's presentations last 2 days. I've learned a lot. And I'm also humbled to share my research that I've been doing the last 10 years, which started with my PhD research. So I will try to focus on the role of the state in that research, but I've got other stuff going on. But Steph asked me specifically to focus on the role of the state. So I did research on Mexico and Turkey for my PhD research. And today, so my PhD research was published as a book. So I will be talking about the findings of that research, but also the research puzzle, the research design, etc. And then I will also talk about some like three papers I've written since then, which also focus mostly on the role of the state. So I will try to squeeze in all of this today. I don't know how much of that I will manage to do. And then, if also I have time, I would like to talk about some thoughts or some implications, lessons for future research. So it's starting with research puzzle and then the research design focusing on Mexico and Turkey, the main argument of the book. And then, so the main, I've got a few arguments in the book, but then I will focus on the role of national institutions and the role of the state. And then I've done further research on why does the state's involvement vary between the two countries. So I will try to talk about that if I have time. So the research puzzles is about the skill formation in middle-income countries. So middle-income countries, I also use the term late industrializing countries. They are argued to end up in the middle-income trap because they focus on labor-intensive production, which require low skills, and then they continue in producing low-skill industries. But are all middle-income countries in a low skills, bad jobs trap? And how are the necessary skills for jobs requiring higher skills, such as technical skills for medium technology manufacturing developed? And what affects the underdevelopment of skill systems in middle-income countries? So the existing literature I looked, so when I was thinking about skills and development and economic growth, inclusive growth for the countries, for middle-income countries. So I said I come from Turkey, and I started with the puzzle of studying Turkey, and then I ended up comparing Mexico with Turkey. I can talk about that maybe later, but not here now. Why I ended up comparing Turkey with Mexico. Everyone asks me that question, like what is the relation? But it's another topic. So I looked at the comparative political economy of skill formation, and this literature focuses mostly on the global north countries, and particularly Germany and then continental European countries versus UK, US. Aldo talked about it a bit in the morning. And then they talk about national institutional complementarities of skill systems, particularly the role of the coordinated businesses and workers. And the role of coordinated businesses also came quite a few times throughout the 2 days in the morning, but also in some of the plenary sessions I've been to, I also heard the role of businesses and coordinated businesses particularly. There is also an emerging literature on the political economy of development in middle-income countries, and they talk about they look at the role of the institutions, and they focus mostly on the role of the businesses and power of business associations with vested interests in low-skill industries, and these businesses are the ones with power, and they don't have interest in pushing the governments for investing in skills, or they also don't have the interest in developing those skill systems themselves because they can develop the necessary specific skills themselves inside the firms, but they don't need the public vocational education training systems. And but the lack of political power of those who would benefit from the public vocational training system, such as small firms, small and medium-sized enterprises, and the labor market outsiders who don't have access to better jobs. They don't have the political power to affect skill formation. That this has been the literature in that looks at skill formation in middle-income countries. The problems of the existing literature, which also have been that they focus mostly on macro-level institutions. So they look at business associations, labor unions, and the complementarities between this, but they don't consider what happens at the micro level. They don't consider what happens in firms, or schools, or why individuals choose certain type of education systems versus others. And also, the micro-level institutions, they focus on certain institutions, but middle-income countries or late industrializing countries might have different types of institutions. And there are also important missing linkages between institutions at the micro level and what happens at the firm level at the micro level, and not studying. Oh, thank you. And not studying what happens at the micro level could cause important information what happens in middle income countries or late industrializing countries. And I think this Skills for Industry project, the findings has been showing us there's a lot of going on at the state level and something happening at the firm level, but that they don't link each other. But if we only studied the institutions, we wouldn't be able to see what happens at the firm level. And they also, this is an important thing that I don't think that has been mentioned that much so far. They only focus on national level institutions without really discussing what the role of the global economy and how does the global economy affect what happens in firms. And in national institutions, and particularly the role of transnational corporations and the links of local companies with the global value chains. And state has been seen as a private actor, passive actor, so state has been seen as an actor whose policies are affected by businesses and workers, but state's own power to affect businesses and workers hasn't been discussed. State has been as like a platform where workers and businesses affect what the state does, as if state doesn't have any power to choose what it does. And so to address these shortcomings, I developed this multi-level research design. I looked at firm-level hiring, training, and employee development practices, at the meso-level governance structures in global value chains, and the micro-level national institutions that affect firms' training practices. This is a kind of a complicated figure. So at the macro level or meso level, there is national institutions. So I used different literatures, national institutions, and then the global value chains, and how these together affect what happens at firm level. And then here I look at the literature on employment systems and human resource management, and how these affect the outcomes at firms level in terms of training, hiring, and employee development. And then how does it affect the development experiences of these countries in terms of high road development or low road development. So I compared two middle-income countries, Mexico and Turkey, and these are examples of most similar cases. I'm going to skip that, why they are most similar cases for now. I did 128 interviews with Turkish and Mexican automotive suppliers, and then different stakeholders that are related to vocational education industry. The automotive industry has been my focus in the firm interviews. And then I only interviewed Mexican and Turkish firms, not multinationals, local companies that are in the automotive value chains. And these are the list of firms. So this is it involves actually in the morning there was discussion about Mexico. It involves firms from both central Mexico and northern Mexico, and in Turkey it's like mostly one region. And so this is one of the outcomes of my research, which was my book. And the main argument of the book is state matters and the most. So I go back to this. So the pressures in the global economy, the pressures in the global supply chains in the automotive industry, they actually have important impact on firms' skill needs, what type of skills the firms need. But they don't affect how the firms generate these skills, how firms find these skills. It is actually national institutions that shape the ways the firms find their skills. So the pressures in the global economy are filtered by the national institutions, and the state affect the national institutions. And then the skilling strategies affect the outcomes for workers and firms, which then affects the prospects of high road or low road development in the two countries. So I wanted to focus on in the book there are chapters that focuses on each of these aspects, but today I'm going to focus on the case of the state. So these are the institutions that have been discussed in the comparative political economy of and then skill formation in the global north, which involves industrial relations, financial system, skill formation system, business associations, welfare system, and sector of comparative advantage is kind of a complementarity, but not an institution. But in the case of Mexico, my research shows that the institutions are quite different. So the vocational education system is one of the important institutions, and then the other institution is business associations, and because both countries, the labor unions are quite weak, they are not an important institution, but instead the regulations on work contracts and particularly minimum wage is an important institution that affects firms' training practices. An important thing, firm's location is an important institution, so if the firm is located in a place that is accessible by different workers, because for example in Turkey, it is located, in both countries they are located outside the city, but in Turkey there is free transportation to these areas for workers who work in these areas. But so this gives an access to larger number of workers for firms. But in Mexico, this kind of transportation doesn't exist. So it's mostly the firms employ only workers that reside in the area where they are located. An important thing that all of these institutions are shaped by the state in both countries. So in Turkey, we see a high state involvement in all of those institutions. The state is a statist vocational education system. The state provides the main vocational education in schools, but also kind of forces firms to get involved in the vocational education. And also, it forces firms to get involved, but also regulates firms' involvement in vocational education through different types of certification, but also through labor regulations. The state also is highly involved in labor regulations and wage setting institutions. An important element here to remember is that in Turkey the minimum wage is really high, much higher than lots of competitors in Central and Eastern Europe, and state has played an important role in this. And the state actually, particularly for automotive industry, which was an important thing in Turkey, that the state requires automotive firms to employ workers only with vocational certificates. So the firms in the automotive industry in Turkey, they cannot employ workers without the vocational education certificate. And this has an important impact on the ways how the firms find these workers. Another important element that the state affects is firms' location. So most firms, these local automotive firms in Turkey, they are located in organized industrial zones, which were developed by the state to promote the industrialization. And lots of Turkish firms are located in these zones. And also the state is highly involved in the provision of cheap public transportation, or sometimes free public transportation for workers to access these zones. And an important thing that I actually missed, military service requirement is a requirement for all workers, all men that are 20 in Turkey. And this is an important impact in the way that firms find their workers with vocational skills. In Mexico, we see very low state involvement in all of these aspects. There are a few people here who have been doing studies on Mexico. It's a very complex vocational education system. So if you look at regulations, it is possible to say that it's like statist vocational education system with high state involvement. There are lots of state vocational schools, but in de facto, the skill system is highly liberal. For example, many of the firms I talked, they didn't have any workers from vocational schools except at higher levels, technician levels, but not at operator levels. And and then the state, this happened mostly because the state left the responsibility of vocational education to firms, and then it is on paper it's possible to argue that firms are highly involved, because in Mexican constitution actually firms are required to provide vocational training to their workers, but that's it. It is not specified what type of training this should be. So often they end up providing like health and safety training, and that's enough. But also, it's also an important implementation problem. Very few firms, for example, I talked to, said that they had inspection from the labor ministry. In terms of labor regulations, an important difference between Turkey and Mexico is the minimum wage. In Mexico, minimum wage is much significantly low, and this is again due to the state institution. The minimum wage in both countries are defined by a state organization, and it has been significantly low in Mexico. And another thing, firms location. Similar to organized industrial zones in Turkey, there are like industrial zones in Mexico, but these are not for Mexican firms. It's mostly foreign multinationals that operate in these zones, while in Turkey, these zones were created for the local industry. I've got 3 more minutes. I will try to explain why the two countries have different types of state involvement. And these are like the 3 papers. I tried to explain this in 3 papers. In 2 of the papers, I looked at partisan politics and the role of political coalitions in developing vocational, in developing more highly vocational training system with high state involvement. But then in my last paper, I actually thought it is more than political parties, and I looked beyond what happens political parties, and I agree that I argue that it is the transformations that happen in the 2 countries in the neoliberal era. So these are some statistics from Turkey about spending on vocational training. So it has been increasing. This is initial vocational training for like people at formal vocational schools. This is for adult education, like training for unemployed. So it has been increasing. Both of them have been increasing in Turkey. And in those 2 papers, in a nutshell, I argue that it is because of the governing political party in Turkey, which has been there for about 20 years now, and maybe going in 2 days, we don't know. They have been, I don't know if it is, I don't want to say anything. So they have developed this coalition with this organization. Its name is not here. This business organization, I don't remember. So it's like a business organization, which is the Union of Chamber of Commerces in Turkey. So it is through this and then a main part of its electorate has been the labor market outsiders. So basically those who don't have access formal and better jobs. So in this paper, but in Mexico, this kind of political coalition didn't exist or didn't emerge, and that has caused the changes in the 2000s in the Turkish vocational education system. But in this other paper, I go a step back and look at what happened before this political party. And I look at the changes in 3 skill system institutions that I defined in the book. So it's basically vocational education systems, the wage setting institutions, and particularly the minimum wage in the absence of labor unions, and the employers' associations. And then I look at, we talked about demand quite a lot. So I look at the demand regimes in both countries after an economic liberalization. And so also demand located within and outside the countries. and also state's commitment to social cohesion. So I've developed this figure. So basically in Mexico, the demand structure is mostly externally led, and the state's commitment to social cohesion has been low. And I argue that this ended up, so my time is up. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I just finished this. And it ended up a liberal vocational education system, low minimum wage, and I actually didn't involve it here. And the dismantling of the corporatist business association structure, which then gave more power to voluntary structures and also the large businesses instead of small businesses. In Turkey, the demand structure is more, foreign investment and exports are still important, but the economic structure or the demand structure is more domestically led. And the state has had more, given more importance to social cohesion, and particularly through minimum wage. Minimum wage has become an important tool for the Turkish state to provide welfare to the mass, because the welfare system in the country wasn't developed. And then, so in the end, it ended up with a status vocational education system, high minimum wage, and the continuation of the corporatist structure. That's it. I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
It's on? It is on. Yeah, I love that term collective. We called ourselves a team for the last 6 years, but I think for the last 6 months, for the next 6 months, it's gonna be collective. Just sounds like much more arty in a way. So how is everyone doing? You know, it's Friday late afternoon. I'd usually be super worried about doing a presentation really in front of anyone. But I was saying to Merve before, I mean, I haven't been in years to a research conference, and the level of enthusiasm and passion I've seen here, it's just really contagious. So I love it. So I'm not too worried about the presentation. But with that, let me go in. So I'm coming with a small presentation called Reflections on Methodology by the Collective. And this is, we've had lots of discussions over the last few days. This is kind of reflecting those discussions, and Carmel was helping me to put it down on slides. If you could just move on. Oh, I can move myself. That's fantastic. Now, you know everyone here. They're all here in the room with us, but you see them here again in photos which were taken 6 years ago. Some of us have gotten a little bit older. And you also see some of us look very serious on those pictures, but whoever was there yesterday evening and saw them on the dance floor, you know how, once they get unleashed, you know how they can be. So actually, as I said, we've been working on, and you've heard this plenty, we've been working together for 6 years, so that's a really long time. And this is the last time we see each other face to face. And I would even say it's the last hour, I mean, because of some of our colleagues are leaving right after our conference here. So it's an emotional moment. Clearly, we've been talking a lot about TVET and the effect of TVET. And we've also been talking, naturally, given this is the last time we see each other, about the effect and the impact of our work, what has been going well and what we could have done better. And the slides are really about this. Carmel and I have called this a journey in 5 parts. This is also reflecting a bit the big milestones of our project, which were the face-to-face meetings, and this is tracking the journey. I think tracking the journey is also important because some of those learnings are very easily said, but they're not so easily done when you're in the midst of things. So I think it's always good to look back and say, would I really do this differently? Well, anyway, that's a question I ask myself a lot. We've started in 2017. The first time we met was in 2018, so quite a bit after the start. And that was a moment in Vietnam. That was a moment, of course, where we learned to work better together because it was the first time we met. But we also spent a lot of time doing preparing our company survey, which was then being started right after we were meeting. And I think it was good, all the enthusiasm and the time we put into this survey. That was one of the core elements of our project. But in hindsight, and you will see these rear mirror bullet points, they're on all slides. That's now looking back with, being kept in hindsight. But what could we do better? And one of the things we feel now we should probably have invested a lot more time in is getting clarity and the common understanding of some of those concepts. And also the purpose of our research. What do we really want to contribute to? We then did this company survey. We met again approximately a year later, and that time in Laos. And obviously, we were talking about the results of that survey, which was administered to, in various ways, to 900 companies. I think, again, here a section on the rear mirror. We had two external referees with us at the time, and they encouraged us to make the scope of our research larger, to also talk about informal economy and talking about value chains. And while those were extremely good additions or ideas, we pushed back at the time and kept our scope the way it was. I think that was the only successful time we did so. And every other time when a new idea came, especially from us ourselves, we added it to the scope, and we added and added and added. And I think that got us in a lot of troubles in parts of those discussions. And then obviously, well, we would have met a year later, and you all know what happened. And in hindsight, it's actually amazing how much work was being done despite the pandemic going on. So we had 108 company studies, case studies we did. We kept assessing the survey data, and we then also prepared the next phase after we knew we could prolong. It was a 3-year research grant, and then we could prolong for another 3 years. And so obviously, we're also preparing that. And another learning here is, now that we all look back, so a learning from the team is, we should probably have done more assessment of that phase 1 data before then rushing into the next one. Mind you, we only ever knew that we had the 3 years, so everything, had to be done on a fast pace. Having known that we had 6 years, we probably would have done things a little bit differently. But yeah, being very conscious about that assessment and really, using our quantitative data for the qualitative reflections and so on. 2022, so last year we met again in Cambodia this time, and we were preparing, among other things, the stories and the articles and the publications we have presented to you over the last 2 days. And we had, again, great reflections and we had great discussions, but it also became clear, and again going back to the beginning, that some of those concepts we didn't, it would have been good to have more clarity in the common understanding, and that made some of those discussions difficult. And we also learned that not all concepts translated equally well into all the different contexts where we were working in. Oh, and then we're here, obviously. And you see there's no rear mirror for this slide because it's still happening. Obviously, we're working on the publications and preparing for this incredible space and opportunity. Now, do I still have time? Alice, how much more time? Come on, give it to me. 6 minutes. Oh, I have to talk slower. All right. I think I only got three more slides, so plenty of time. I should do a joke or two. Let's do 5. Okay. These are our learnings. So, I mean, obviously, the rear mirror view was also our learnings, but that's capturing it a little bit differently. And maybe it sounds too negative, all these points on the slides, but those are the things we want to do better next time we have a 6-year research project, or potentially also a 1 or 2 year, if it's not such a luxurious opportunity. But yeah, these are the things we want to do better, and maybe they're also of some use for you. So the first point here would be make the hard decisions regarding scope. We felt, well, that such cross-country comparisons were extremely complex, and that bit us again and again, this complexity. And having a smaller scope could have helped us dig deeper in parts. Now understand, listening to the conversations and the presentations before, I'm not arguing everything has to be small and simple and just piecemeal, but I think it's really good to have that, to be conscious about that trade-off and not trying to do both. That to me is an important learning. The second learning is spend a lot of time on design. I mean, we all spend a lot of time on design, obviously, we did that too, but I think in hindsight, we feel we should have spent more. And as I said before, we could have had more common understanding on our purpose, how to best add value to the policy discourse, to the academic literature, and have a common understanding around these concepts we're using. Point 4. Oh, my numeracy skills clearly have gone down. So 3 or 4, as you want. No, this is good. Let's go with 4. We're adding. Point 4 was spend a lot of time on design, not just the overall design and the design of instruments, where we have spent a lot of time doing, but also spend a lot of time the design of the analysis. That always seems to be a little bit forgotten. We have done that as well, but we wish in hindsight we would have done more of that. Not least because we were overwhelmed by an ocean of data from all the from the survey and the case studies we've done, and I think we wish we would have been a bit more conscious about that part as well. And then 5, because this is a 6-year, well, it ended up as a 6-year project and involved a lot of researchers from very different contexts and disciplines. It would have been good to be more systematic about knowledge management and learning. Yes, sorry. And yes, for instance, being systematic, meaning, you know, we would have to develop an agenda, see what the learning needs are, and then address them systematically. And then a final point, oh no, I'm still on 6. So a final point I want to make, and to keep the time, is, I want to go back first, since I have the time. I do? I want to say one thing. I think getting the scope right would have helped us with a lot of different things. And another point which would have helped us with a lot of different things is embedding our research in the theory better and understanding the context and the factors we're researching and how we can best research those factors. I think those are the things, if we would have gotten them right, a lot of things would have fallen into place. That's what I wanted to add. Thanks very much. I hope that was helpful. If not, you've seen all the other papers and inputs we've done. Go and download them from our website. And one last thing I want to say is, so we're also, as it is good practice, we will make the data available from this project. So if we're hoping that will add to use for academics and people supporting academics. And with that, I would like to finish. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you to you and the collective. I wonder if one can join the collective now into another form and spirit. And thanks for the learning. I think it's actually very interesting, and most of your reflections can apply to many of our projects as well. So really interesting to hear such a detailed learning, reflection and process. We move on to the next speaker, and we discuss the key challenges for research and policy making, moving forward with a just transition skills hub for Africa. Let me try. Hela Lotz-Sitsitska.
Yes, it's okay.
More or less. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And just thank you very much to, yes, everybody in the conference. It's been an incredible conference. I've enjoyed it hugely and learned, just like everybody else, a huge amount. So my job is actually not to make a new presentation, but to just bring together some reflections from this conference into that particular very challenging topic, which Prisha gave me, so I'll blame her. So I'll just call this a few thoughts on policy and research related to skills for just transitions, and the idea being towards a skills hub for just transitions in Africa, which is, I think, what this conference wants to, shape. So I wanted to start with where we started, actually, at the Origins Center. So I just said origins and transitions. And when we walked into the Origins Center, the first exhibition was this amazing exhibition of, the history of transitioning on the African continent. And right at the top was the carbon layer. I don't know if you noticed it. And in the carbon layer was all the plastic and the waste and the rubbish and everything else that we're producing out of that latest transition. Not only on the African continent, but if you walked further down, you would see it happening all across the planet. So I just thought, okay, this is what's brought us together, actually, is, carbon extraction and injustices that have emerged around that, both social, economic, and environmental, as we heard this morning. And I wanted to thank both Wits and the ILO for bringing us together to think skills in such a, way. So I loved the focus on the low and middle income countries. I think it's high time, and we've heard so many lovely presentations of bringing that into strong focus here. And of course, that would have to be a strong focus for such a skills hub. And with that, we also brought the hovering climate crisis into focus. That is hovering around all of us, and I don't think any of us really know what to do about it well enough yet. The other thing that I wanted to just bring in focus was talked about a bit, but perhaps not enough, is the young people on this continent that are facing unemployment and also underemployment, and in extremely high numbers. So of the 420 million youth that are aged between 13 and 35 on this continent, 1/3 are unemployed and discouraged, another third are vulnerably employed, and only 1 in 6 is in wage employment. So when we talk about skills development, we can ask the question, skills development for whom, I guess, is something we should think about, and there's been some discussion about that. Where does most of Africa's work take place, and where are the skills needed? That discussion has also come up in various ways across the different sessions, and particularly in the smaller rooms. The question of the absence of a focus on informal sectors, rural areas, and so on has also come up, but also more in the outside rooms. And so that made me think about the concepts of work and also where skill is formed. We had a very interesting discussion also about how skill is formed in one of the sessions. And what struck me this morning when we were listening to the story of the coal miners is what are the complex forms of transitioning that are implied in the notion of reskilling. That has not been discussed, and I think it's a very big discussion in the just energy transition, but in just transitions more broadly. So that's just a bit of background. Then I wanted to just talk about the policy question, and I'm not a policy person. But what struck me in this discussion that was going on here was a lot of discussion about the policy system and the policy ecosystem that surrounds skills planning. And it feels like the skills planning can't exist without that, and the relationships between the skills policy system and the other policy systems is a very critical issue to better understand. And I loved this last presentation. It really raised the point about the position of skills policy in the context of other policy, particularly the role of the state. We had a very critical question from the back here yesterday about, what's the responsibility of the developmental state? There was discussion about labor market policies and, of course, discussion about them working well under near-perfect conditions, and all of us knowing that this is not our context. The near-perfect conditions don't exist. In fact, the opposite, probably. And there was a lot of discussion about what that looks like as well. There was also discussion about the need to complement labor market policies with industrial policy, social development policy, and how that comes together, social protection policy. Again, we saw it coming through in your presentation now. And how that translates into the skill system was also very interesting in terms of the discussion going on. And where does skills policy then fit into all of this, and what should that look like? That, I think, is a very important question that was raised. And the most important byline with that one is it should not be an afterthought. And I was interested in how often that came up. So we feel like we are an afterthought, and we should not be an afterthought. So there's something very important in that. And then there was a lot of discussion about coordination and cooperation and so on. And then the policy making process itself. And I loved the question this morning. I can't remember I think it was from Diet. Who has the voice? The closer you get to the people, the voices are clearer and louder about what is needed, but their power is reduced. And the closer you get to policy, you get closer to the rules of the game. And then how do those come together, and what are the rules of the game? So that was an interesting perspective, I thought. Then I want to move now from policy to research. And there's been a lot of discussion about types of research, and I think that's been very interesting too. And clearly, this is an area of research in society that cannot only work with one type of research. I also like the discussions on methodology and analytical prowess, and I loved this last reflection on the comparative research and how we can do it better. Also the mixed methods research. But I liked also the analytical prowess that was coming through from the work. What skill systems can and can't do? What should they be doing? What are they doing well, and what urgently needs to change and shift? And if we look across this conference, we could actually probably pull together something very interesting. So as the proceedings come through, it might be interesting to look at that. I also thought the focus on comparative research around critical shared questions was very important, and we could see the usefulness of a comparative perspective, but we could also see the usefulness of what kind of comparative perspective and where that comparative work needs to be situated. So I think that was something interesting. And then, of course, there's this very ongoing, like, I don't, sometimes I feel like thinking it's like, yeah, why is it such a ongoing problem for this sector? And this is the supply-demand dilemma in complex contexts. And how do we constitute our research and what we do there? So people talk about, you know, demand-led skills planning, anticipatory skills, supplier-driven, and actually it all has to work together better, and that's the real problem. So it feels to me like it's the interface of supply and demand that we need to be really looking into in more detail. And then I think we also need to ask other kinds of questions, like how is demand constructed, coming through also from the most presentation just now from Turkey. And then there was also some discussion about, you know, just basic skills intelligence research that we can't do without, such as the structure of the labor market, associated skills, the nature of work, how it's changing, inclusions and exclusions, changing dynamics, and so on. So these are just some brushstrokes. And then there was also quite a lot of work on what should be in focus in this research that we do. Of course, the political economy of skills formation in mid and low income countries, very important and coming to the surface often. Where to focus? Is national level focus adequate? Multi-level systemic focus seems to be coming through as a very important direction. The issue of coordination, cooperative models, that seem to be very important, that are necessary for skills formation. Multi-institutional collaborations came forward this morning. The formation of trust was a very interesting question for me. The point about necessary but not sufficient conditions that Steph raised, I think these are very interesting questions for research. From skills anticipation to embedding of skills was also coming through a lot. And then the embedding of the skills in the context of local economies and what kind of methodologies and approaches are needed there. It's not the same as doing the research if it's a national level review type of thing. In how do we embed skills in these strategic economic and development plans, for example, the just energy transitions frameworks that we saw, the two presentations yesterday and today, and what kinds of skills research models are needed for this embedding work is another dimension. I thought that for the notion of just transitions, it is very important for us to bring the at-risk value chains into focus. We saw one presentation on that this morning when it came to the coal sector. That's an at-risk value chain. And if we'd used that as a starting unit of analysis, it could also deliver, I think, some very interesting comparative studies or depth studies, or, you know, and we saw some of the potential of that kind of research this morning. There's been a lot of discussion about care in this conference, starting when we had the Deputy Vice Chancellor telling us that we'd forgotten to include care in our economies and in our skills systems and in our skills planning. We've become very technical and we've forgotten about the basics of being careful solidarity, we heard from one presentation just now, and then also more robust concepts of justice in skills transitioning research. It's only been touched on, but it's not been talked about much at all. And then I think there's some temporality challenges that will need to be looked at, because we have the notion of out of sync, which has been coming up. We've had the notion of urgency. We've had the notion of reactive, and so on. So there's many dimensions there. Disjunctures, junctures. Challenging linear causality, yes. And then there's also been some discussion about specialist and transferable skills and so on. And the skill system itself and its inequalities is where I really wanted to end. And that goes back to the resources that are allocated also into the system. And we had a presentation from Peliwe in one session, which was really brilliant. She was bringing the community colleges into focus and asking what happened there. And, you know, what a big question for a skills conference like this. So I also wanted to end with my favorite quote from the entire conference. And I don't know if Peliwe is still here, but it is actually a quote from her presentation. And she made a point in her presentation that we need, and she was talking about the neglect of people in the rural areas, that we don't understand how to work with them, all the skills that they're interested in learning, and how to even begin to respond to that. And so she made this quote, break away in bold and new ways from what exists. And I thought I'd just finish with that, because that could be a very good way of thinking about this kind of a skills hub. Thank you.
Wow, thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like actually to just apologize with the way I introduced you, but you've noticed yourself, you didn't need me to say it, but Hela was already drawing the conclusions of this event. So these two final interventions are really to start putting together the elements of this possible idea of a research hub or collective, number two, or any forms of shape that this can take on how to put our thoughts and efforts together on skills for just transition. So thank you for summarizing already some of the elements. And I have already a rear mirror type of thinking, because I wish we had, as you were speaking, a board populating with the ideas, with the connection. I know we've been taking notes, and I wish we had a mind map, because you really draw a mind map. So that's our thought for next time, but we will definitely do as part of our report to put these ideas together and the different linkages. So that was the first, and the second and last but not least, the speaker for today is Simon McGrath, that will basically continue the putting together of this puzzle, or this mapping onto the summaries, responses, observations, and ideas that we can have to build our research project in the future. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. Following on from Hala is daunting enough, but without her invoking Peliwe as well. So I think I should give up at this point. But thank you all so much for being here, because it's the people that make these things. But thank you obviously to the ILO for supporting it. But I do want to remind us that real is incredible. You know, I would struggle. Yeah, I don't know if others like Philip, who've been working, you know, within the European networks on this, would agree with me. But it's difficult to find a centre with this quality, and that's really, really important. So I hope that's recorded in case head of school, dean, vice chancellor are listening. Please, Carmel, make sure that that's the quote we take to them. You know, and the quality of the event obviously partly is about the quality of the social event and the infrastructure, but is ultimately about the quality in the intellectual discussion that we've had. So thank you all. So I want to try and sort of be in sort of in dialogue with what Hala's been saying. There'll be some things that I'll reinforce, and some other things where I'll emphasize some things slightly. But, you know, she ended with that quote from Peliwe. And I suppose one of my sort of nagging worries as we've been meeting is, you know, we're talking about disruption, transition, transformation. But are we, and here I'm meaning policy and research communities as the two communities here, and those that straddle the two, as many of us have done historically, are we still using too many old tools and approaches in how we're trying to think about these new things? Tools that were designed for rational planning were, of course, the complexity of the system change that we're talking about is a very different order of question. So I do wonder, and I'll come back to this a bit later, but of course, some of our tools never worked anyway. I won't name any of them, but some of you know my views on some of those. But, you know, some of our tools have never worked, in spite of our claims at times that they do. But there's a lot of research evidence that is negative about some aspects of the VET toolkit, TM. So it's not what works, which is beloved of some governments, like my own one, that we should be asking. It's not what works, which suggests that there's one simple technical solution that works everywhere, but it's more, what does work in this context at this time and place, and why, and what doesn't work, and why did this not work the way it intended, and maybe it did some things better than we intended. To think back to the reflection on the collectives project, some things probably worked better than you planned at the start. Certainly in our collective, there were things that we hadn't planned at the start that were better. There were other things inevitably that weren't. So I think we need to think about what does and doesn't work, when, and of course for whom. So that's the first thought. And then in talking about change, it's been mentioned a little bit, what are our theories of change? Because part of the problem there is that often our theories of change are, if we do this, it will be okay. And that's essentially the level of the theory. Or, well, we've done this before, so if we just keep doing it, eventually it will work. Or, oh God, I can't possibly think of doing something different, and the consequences of changing it. So let me take my own sector, the universities. Would we have invented universities today? Probably not. Do they make sense as institutions, economically, socially, politically? But if we could discover that once I've retired, that would be nice. So, what are our theories of change? Because again, they're not theories for rational planning. They're theories for dealing with complexity. They have to be theories for dealing with responding to a world, having a rough idea of where we're going. So all the work about theory of change is about having a sense of direction, and a lot of the just transitions as well. We've got a sense of where we want to go, but we can't use metaphors like blueprint. Maybe we can use roadmap, as long as we're prepared to adapt when there's a problem in the road. So we've got to be thinking about what are those, what happens along that road. New things happen along the road that suddenly they've improved the road and you can get somewhere faster. Happens occasionally. So suddenly the journey becomes easier. But equally, most of us in most countries experience potholes, roadblocks, a whole range of things, road traffic accidents, particularly, at certain times of the year in this country. So we know that there are things that get in the way of the plan, and you have to be able to plan as you go and say, no, all right, okay, yeah, now the sat-nav does some of that for you if you've got the sat-nav, but you've got to be adjusting routes at times. So we've got to have metaphors and processes that are not about drawing something down simply from a toolkit or a blueprint or a roadmap, but using those things reflexively to respond to the world that we're existing in. And I don't think we're yet that good at those things, we collectively. Of course, we need to be framing the issues that we're studying, and we need to be thinking about that framing. The majority of the learning and work that takes place globally does not take place in formal learning spaces and formal workspaces. But it's really complicated. We need, and it's good if ILO people aren't listening, we need to problematize the informal-formal relationship, because there's indecency and precarity in both formal and informal. There's actually some decent work in the informal. We've got to be careful about oversimplifying those things. And we've got to be trying to remember that people are constantly trying to work out in this world of work and learning where to go next. I doubt that many people in this room went through schooling till the end of formal schooling and then went into a job, or even went straight into university and into a job. Many of us, I suspect, like me, move between the two systems over time according to the world around us. the dream of a better life, the desperation to get out of this awful job, a whole range of things that shape our decisions as how we engage with both learning and working. And so we need to know that people are moving through these systems as individuals, often embedded within communities, and the number of us who are reliant on others in terms of, someone mentioned about having a rich uncle in the township if you're going to get on in small enterprise, but going for study, the number of us who have been sponsored by someone along the line in our studies. So we need to think about these as collective and individual processes of complexity that are not linear, has been said already. As I've said, and of course we need to frame it in terms of what Hala said towards the end, and thinking of where some bits of economics are going now, Kate Rayworth's work, but we in Glasgow from 2 years ago have a professor in wellbeing economy. How do we start to think about the wellbeing economy, the provisioning economy, the care economy, and not just mean the healthcare sector in that? So what are those broader conceptions of what work and the economy are about? And then what does that mean for our skill systems? Too many of us, me definitely included, have privileged the institution. I said this in a different space, have privileged the institutional in the sociological sense of it, getting the rules and structures right. We privilege those things over the relational, how people work together. We've thought that if we got an NQF, if we got CETAs, lots of other examples, if we got these systems in place, they would compensate for the fact that we weren't like the Germans and the Swiss, and we hadn't got systems that had organically emerged. So we could kind of substitute system for organic relational development. And I've fallen into that logic as well. But the problem is that often we've then got the system in place rather than we've actually got those who are going to populate the system and make it work. I don't know who here has seen the musical Hamilton, but there's a song there about being in the room where it happens, and that's really important. The discussion that Aldo, for instance, had this morning, but others, who is in that discussion? Who is excluded from that discussion? And yes, getting the tripartite partners there clearly is important, but getting beyond the tripartite partners in many cases is also very important. He told us this morning that trust could be learned and built, but equally it was hard. So we have to think about what are those processes where we might be able to make it better and why it doesn't work in many places. And obviously, Merva, you were sort of touching on some of that stuff by looking at the sectoral stuff there. I want to say two more things quickly. And again, you talked about multiscalarity, which is really important here. So we've got to add in that meso. That's a really important step. We've got to think about the causal relationships. Does it go up and down as in yours, or does it go between all, or which way round does it go? But of course, we've got to think about that in a broader sense. We've got to bring in the ecological. And we've also got to think about the scales of human life, the life world, society, as we go through those scales, and not just of the work world. And how do those relate to each other, I think, is really important. And that leads, I think, to one methodological challenge for us. What's the intersection, if we go to the meso, between place and sector? Obviously, the two often have pretty clear relationships. We talk about the auto industry in this country, and the Eastern Cape is a particular hub of it. Or we go to maritime, and KZN is a particular hub. And the same, has been explained in Latin America and Turkey. So there's a spatial dimension to this, but I think looking with the spatial lens as well as the sectoral lens gives us interesting dynamics of how these things work. And so I think if we're taking research forward, we have to come from those knowing they both intersect. So let me finish, seeing I'm a university professor, by thinking about research. But I think we need, as has already been said, that plurality of method, of theory. But crucially, we need a dialogue between them. Far too often we sit and we talk to our people. It's like so much else in society. They're the people we want to talk to because they're sound. And we don't talk to those people who are unsound in a different disciplinary space, or even worse, the people who are just that tiny bit away from you in the same discipline, but are unorthodox, you know. So we've got to be, you know, we've got to think about those things. How do we try and generate that? But last thing I want to say linked to that is thinking about our relationship with those we are researching. Seeing we've been talking about moving away from extractive industries, let's also think about moving away from extractive research. Much of our, and I'll say our South African research, because of course, for some people here know, I was a director in the Human Sciences Research Council, so I did lead research projects in this country, design them. And too much of our research in colleges, certainly, was we were going in to evaluate them. And they knew they were being evaluated. That doesn't do much for trust. It doesn't do much for relationships. We went in, we found out things. Sometimes, you know, that was a positive story for them. Sometimes it wasn't. But, you know, it was a particular mode of research. And it had a particular economics where I was on the big salary in Pretoria. And we had field workers at various levels doing things. And if I came down, it would be to talk to the big men in the auto industry or whatever. It wouldn't be to do work in villages. You know, so there were hierarchies of how we did these things. And I think we need to think about those things. There are other alternatives. You know, David Monk was talking about some of the work that they're doing in Gulu, much more getting the youth at the center of this process. But also I think we need to think about the research contract that's implicit when we're, say, going into college and talking to students. I was, one of my PhD students, Leslie Powell, who will be known to be a former PhD student, you know, would recount from her fieldwork. So she's from the coloured community in Cape Town and going into her own community. A lot of it was from young people trying to work out how to move on in life. Is, well, you are interviewing me. So what is it that you've learned in your life to get on that side? And so how do we learn some of that stuff? So that contract where it's actually learning on both sides. The final thing, reflecting back to the collective, is time. Too much of our research is too fast. A 6-year project, even then, you're rushing. So if we're talking about research, I think we need, were possible, to be talking about time, to build relationships, to build designs, and not be rushing.
Thank you, Salman. Thank you. Wow. Thank you very much. I think it's very difficult to add anything now to what you've said. So let me immediately turn the floor to you for a couple of final reflections. I would say more reflections than questions, because we won't have capacity to answer many questions at this point, although we have many. So yeah, let's take 2-3 interventions from the floor. I see one here. If you can help me with the mic. Yes. Always with the idea of building the way forward and what
Thank
next.
you. One has been following this this work for quite some time now, in these conferences, in journals, you know, and then we've been watching as it translates into the policies, right? The practices and the sitters. So as I'm seated here for the past 2 days, it's quite a very captivating, quite very moving, you know, conversations that are taking place. But I still have questions that I'm asking myself, and then sometimes I'm answering myself as well, you know. And so amongst those questions are, there are things that we know. He reflected on the methodological reflections. He was reflecting on the theories, right? And then I'm trying to think as to, by the way, who are these people? You know, that is just one question. And then 2, I think you reflected also on the method. I mean, part of the methodology. I think we discussed it yesterday, and then Silva Hammond said something about it. The data that we collect, and then it leads to another question that says, whose voices are these? You know, she has a. I mean, I think she wrote something, quite a few, about the dissipating voices of the left, the dissipating voices of the trade unions, but I think I didn't hear much. You know, when I came in, well, it was part of the expectations that one had, but I mean that doesn't mean much because we're just observing and then looking at these things. And then now also what then intrigues me is the NQF systems themselves, and then I'm looking at a number of things. I'm looking at even what the DHET person, Sable, reflected on to say it takes longer to develop skills, and therefore they have to be right at the beginning when these projects are conceptualized. And then I'm thinking, aren't these NQF systems actually constraining, the skills development to a certain extent? I'd like to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one who asks questions to myself. So let's continue doing that and continue sharing as well. I think there is a lot that we need to process and digest to be able to put together a way forward. Let me collect a couple of other reflections, questions from the floor, or thoughts or concluding questions, points that you want to raise. Anyone? I know you're all thinking of the bride that is waiting for you, but yes.
Thank you very much. I think for me, coming from renewable energy sector, it was my first time attending a conference where it involves labor, education, the TVET people, and maybe the policy, or maybe we miss some. I think I heard yesterday that we miss the TVET, or we miss some people, and I'm just thinking, I think in general, and I was looking at the what do you call the training authorities in South Africa, of different sectors, of different sectors communicating to each other. And maybe I'm just applauding the people who arranged such a conference, because I'm saying it's my first time, and I think this is the way forward. We cannot do things on our own. Even the smaller organizations are very important. The ministries are very important to come together. And I don't know who is going to organize again something like that at the national levels.
We are happy to come to Namibia, Thank you very much. I think, 1, 2, 3. Yes, let's start from here.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, I'm a product of TVET College, and I've also lectured at the TVET College before lecturing at the University of Technology. And I've been working in the industry 7 years under Toyota, 8 years under Mercedes-Benz. So I have the hands-on and the academic side of it. I've been excited to be in here. I came from the academic side and the CETA, but I was asking myself, then when we are talking TVET here, it's as if we're talking to TVET, but we are not talking with TVET and getting what makes them not to work. And I was talking to one of my colleagues from UK saying, as a TVET Council member now, I've been going to their workshops, checking what works, what doesn't work, and talking to the students and the lecturers, not to management. And I think that is where we need to start and focus on. And the question is, when are we going to have another session of this type? Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a hand. Was it you? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Martin Mikkelsen from Uppsala University, Faculty of Medicine. So, for me, the conference started in the dynamic between learning and earning. And I was thinking there, that's quite interesting. In combination to, on the same talk, it was talking about how the care economy is potentially the biggest that's coming up. And I feel like throughout this whole conference, health and well-being has been in the background. And I think it is kind of the thing that happens after earning. What can we do with what we have earned? If we have skills, if we have jobs, what can we do with it? And a lot of the challenges, of course, related to poverty or marginalization is around, you might earn, but the challenges around environmental threats and about health threats is also going to drain you a lot. So I think this links into the need of the care economy, that we're, I think, engaging with the question of how can we also develop skills around care to support other parts of the economy, of especially young people's potential of being part of society moving forward. Because you might have the skills, but in order to use them, you also need to have health and well-being, both physical but also mental. So I think health is what I would like to kind of push into this conversation by then. Thank you.
Thank you. And adding, indeed, all the elements of the just transition. And I think actually health is at the core of it. Thank you very much for that. I think there was Stephanie, but before going to Stephanie, we stay this side and I come to you. Can I see the end so we have an idea of 1, 2? Yes.
Yeah, also short reflection from my side. Kirsten Freimann, GIZ. I found these 2 days extremely inspiring, and I was wrapping my head around all the time, what do all these insights mean for our implementation work? Like, how can we support the unlocking of jobs, what we discussed in our last session? Like, this is what we are questioning, like, all the time. What do we have to do to really support, the employment, support the skills development, that it happens actually in practice? And maybe that's a topic for the next session, to come together and exchange between practitioners. What actually is happening in the field of just transition, and what is working, what is not working, because we are also talking about testing and innovate new approaches, because it is such a huge challenge that I think a further exchange on that, what's happening, would be really, really valuable. So maybe we can discuss that further. Thank you.
Thank you. So just element for the next events, and I would say also hopefully to discuss what has happened differently. I think there is the last one from here.
Thank you. I think one of the other areas that also needed to be brought into the conversation is related to the generations that we're dealing with at the moment and what excites them as young people. And I think, how do they see the future and what is it that they want to achieve in the future, as opposed to how we've always structured things and how we'd like them to fit into these boxes. And then also, how do we design workplaces? And I think some research needs to be done in that area so that we can make workplaces exciting for the new generations. I don't think the generational conversation has happened enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Carmel, I'm not even watching if there are other hands up. I know, because Carmel is telling me that I'm not managing time properly. So, Stephanie, you have the mic already. Fantastic.
I'll be very quick. I wish we could ask questions to Merve, because I wanted to know about the military service and what the role was in skills. But instead, I think I just wanted to actually pick up on a key message from her presentation, which I found really fascinating and important for all of us as researchers. Because your argument about the role of the state is fascinating in terms of how you unpacked it. Kind of terrifying if you live in South Africa right now, where we have some questions about the capacity of many of our state institutions. But I thought that what was very useful analytically was that you speak about the role of the state, but you really hone in on areas where the state played a role and influenced, and those areas then influenced the possibilities for skill formation. And it got me thinking, maybe those of, we also need to hone in on those areas with or without the state. If the state isn't there, to still look analytically at key areas for intervention where other role players could maybe be playing a role where the state isn't. So I found it really, really interesting and incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I think that's okay. And you're right, there was no time for questions after your presentation, but definitely you have raised very important points, and I hope there is still time for bilateral catch up with you, and maybe other colleagues might have more questions on your findings. I have now to close, and before passing on the mic to Carmel, allow me just to say my takeaway, not myself, on behalf of the organization and the ILO and the colleagues that I represent here. Just a big thank, first of all, to all of you for being with us these 2 days with a lot of passion, with a lot of ideas, and with a lot of contributions on how to shape just transition. And this is the takeaway for us. As ILO, we've been promoting just transition now for the past decade, at least. We have these beautiful guidelines on what a just transition should look like, and you are giving us here ideas on how to make it happen in practice. And this is what we are committed to find spaces at the level of policies, at the level of implementation, and driven by research, and particularly this research agenda that we want to jointly promote with the Real Center and with all the institutions here, to see how this can happen in practice. How can we see just transition and examples of just transitions instead of talking about it? So this is our commitment, to find spaces at national, subnational, local level where these connections can work and produce results that then can inform the way forward. And hopefully the next discussion we will discuss results most of all. Thank you very much, and a big thanks to the Real Center for inviting us to contribute to this event.